Hello everyone, it's Scott, and I'm back for the top 15 uncommon cards for Standard from Tarkir Dragonstorm. But before we do, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Tarkir Dragonstorm season and beyond. And if you're looking for cards from the site, you can check us out on the web at caffeinatedgamers.tcgplayerpro.com. So let's dive into my top 15 uncommons for Tarkir Dragonstorm. So at number 15, I've got the tri-lands from the set. I think they're all going to be important because you're going to be wanting to play 3 color decks to play the dragons from the set, and these are going to be, I think, utilized all throughout Standard in a wide variety of decks. At number 14, I've got Dragon Sniper for a green mana. You get a human archer. He's a 1/1 with reach, vigilance, and death touch. And I think that's the thing that's really key here is the reach with the death touch. So any dragon that your opponent might attack with, Dragon Sniper can kill when it attacks. At number 13, I've got Shocking Sharpshooter for 1 and a red mana. We have a human archer. That's a 1/3 with reach. And whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So I think this is going to be a card that might be a couple copies in our Convoke deck, or if there's a mobilized deck that forms where we're getting the mobilize abilities every single turn. I think this is a great card to go with that because it's going to do an additional damage every single turn that it's on the battlefield to your opponent. Right, at number 12, I've got Spectral Denial. For X and a blue mana, you get an instant, and this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. Counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So I think this is the go-to counter spell that we're going to see in Standard if you're playing a large creature deck. Because in the mid game, you might have 2, 3, 4 creatures on the field that are 4 power or greater, and because of that, this can become a 1 mana counter spell almost if your opponent can't pay the 3 or 4 mana that they're going to need to prevent Spectral Denial from countering their spell. All right, at number 11, I've got Sunset Strikemaster for 1 and a red mana. You get a human monk. That's a 3/1, and you get to tap it to add red mana. And for 2 and a red mana, you can tap it and sacrifice this creature. It deals 6 damage to target creature with flying. So obviously it's designed to hit a dragon with the sacrifice ability, so very good in limited. But the thing I'm most excited about here is we have a red mana dork. And we know that most of the dragons from the set that are the most powerful are in red in some form or another, and most of the dragons that we've had from previous sets are going to be in red. So this is a great ramp card for a red deck that wants to simply ramp into those large dragons that we have currently in Standard. All right, at number 10, I've got Corroding Dragonstorm for 1 and a black mana. You get an enchantment, and when this enchantment enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life, and you get to surveil 2. And when a dragon you control enters the battlefield, return this enchantment to its owner's hand. So I think this is a card that's going to see play in multiple decks, potentially in Standard. So obviously a dragon deck makes sense because it can bounce it back to your hand anytime you play a dragon. But also the Esper or Dimir bounce deck. This could be a great card in those decks as well as a way of doing damage to your opponent and gaining life, kind of stabilizing yourself on the board by using the abilities. All right, at number 9, I've got Frontline Rush for a red and a white mana. You get an instant, and you can create either 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, or target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is a number of creatures you control. So I think this is a card that possibly in any deck that would be playing Leyline of Resonance could go into. And we do have those new lands that I think will make it a little easier to potentially even go into 3 colors there. But the inclusion of white in those decks, I think, is probably okay, simply because you're going to be able to protect your stuff with white spells that do that naturally. So because of that, I think this is a card that might have sneaky potential in any Leyline of Resonance deck. All right, at number 8, I've got Static Snare for 4 and 1 white mana. You get an enchantment with flash, and this spell costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature that's either yours or your opponent's. And when this enchantment enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So basically you get to take out their best attacker or best blocker in this, whatever the circumstances are. And it is also something that will trigger up the beanstalk. So when Leyline Binding leaves the format in August, I think this is a card that probably slots in pretty nicely in Standard in those decks. At number 7, I've got Strategic Betrayal for 1 and a black mana. You get a sorcery, and target opponent exiles a creature they control and their graveyard. So this is a card that I think is at a minimum a sideboard card in black decks because it's a 2-mana way to remove your opponent's graveyard. And we know we've got so many graveyard decks currently in Standard that ability to do this, in addition to exiling a creature your opponent controls, is going to be pretty powerful in Standard. Next, at number 6, I've got Glacial Dragonhunt for a blue and a red mana. You get a sorcery, you get to draw a card, and then you may discard a card. When you discard a non-land card this way, Glacial Dragonhunt deals 3 damage to target creature. It also has Harmonize for 4 and a blue and a red mana, and this means you can replay it from your graveyard. And early in the game, I think this is going to be a good spell, and I think it's going to be built around the decks that are trying to play the Mako and other cards from Ether Drift that when you discard a card, you get a +1/+1 counter. We got several of those cards in Standard. So I think this is going to be a card that slots very nicely into those decks and helps them out quite a bit because it's another way to guarantee that you get to discard a card. And the added bonus of doing 3 damage to a creature, I think, helps this see Standard play. All right, at number 5, I've got Hardened Tactician for 1, a white, and a black mana. You get a human warrior. That's a 2/4. And you can pay 1 and sacrifice a token to draw a card. So I think Hardened Tactician is going to fit into any mobilized deck really well, or really any deck that creates tokens that get sacrificed at the end of the turn. So I think this probably has implications or ramifications beyond Standard, because we know in the past there have been cards that do that. So in a sacrifice deck, I think this is going to be really powerful because now you're going to be able to sacrifice all those mobilized tokens and get cards for them. And I think in Standard, that's going to be a really powerful ability. All right, coming in at number 4, I've got Twinmaw, Stormbrood, and Charring Bite. Now the reason this is here is Charring Bite for 1 and a red mana. You get a sorcery, that's an omen, and Charring Bite deals 5 damage to target creature without flying. So this kills Sheoldred, Beza, and a few other troublesome cards in Standard, and it's doing it for only 2 mana. Okay, and right now the going rate for that is 3, unless you're coming up with a way to cost reduce. So I think this is a really solid way to guarantee 5 damage to a creature in Standard that isn't flying. And then on the other side of it, late in the game after you've shuffled this back in and maybe you draw it in the late game, if you want to and you have the mana, you can play Twinmaw Stormbrood for 5 and a white mana. You get a dragon with flying, that's a 5/4, and when this creature enters the battlefield, you gain 5 life. So a very powerful card for Standard, in my opinion. All right, number 3, Skirmish Rhino for a white a black and a green mana, you get a rhino with trample, and when this creature enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, and it's a 3/4. So I think this is, it's not Siege Rhino, which costs a mana more, but it's pretty close. So I think Abzan decks will want to play this, and having trample is such a powerful ability in Standard, and in any Abzan deck, I think this will be a good fit. At number 2, we've got Kheru, Goldkeeper for 1 and Sultai colors. You get a dragon that's a 3/3 with flying. And when 1 or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, create a treasure token. And it also has Renew for 2 and Sultai colors. You can exile this card from your graveyard to put 2 +1/+1 counters and a flying counter on target creature, and you can activate that only as a sorcery. So we've got a bunch of decks already in Standard that care about having things leave your graveyard, whether it's the Insidious Roots deck or other decks that do this. I think this is a card that fits into those really well, because you're going to be able to, every time you have one of those cards leave your graveyard, you get a treasure, which allows you to do more on every single turn. All right, and at number 1, I've got Kishla Skimmer for a green and a blue mana. You get a Bird Scout, that's a 2/2 with flying, and whenever a card leaves your graveyard during your turn, you draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So once a turn, when it's your turn, you get to draw a card when you have something leave your graveyard. And we just talked about the Goldkeeper as another card that benefits you in this, and I think Kishla Skimmer is an immediate upgrade in any deck that's playing Insidious Roots or the like, because now when you do the Insidious Roots things, you're also going to be drawing a card, and that's very powerful in Standard. All right, so those are my top 15 uncommons from Tarkir Dragonstorm. I've left links to the entire Tarkir Dragonstorm playlist for you, so you can take a look at the top Mythic Rare video and also the top 15 Rare video. And I'll be back tomorrow with one more video looking at the commons I think are going to have the most likely impact on Standard. So thanks. I'll see you in the next one.